In the span of just a few weeks, the global security environment in the Middle East has shifted from heightened tensions to full-blown combat operations. What was once described as unprecedented military preparations has now spilled into active conflict, with the United States and Israel launching large-scale strikes against Iranian targets and Tehran responding with missile and drone attacks across the region. This isn't routine military rotation. This is a deliberate reshaping of force posture and combat capability in real time, and it's worth examining each piece in detail to understand not just what is happening, but why it matters. One of the most striking developments in the U.S. military's approach to modern warfare is the activation of its first dedicated one-way attack drone unit, known as Task Force Scorpion Strike. This unit, created under U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, represents a doctrinal shift. Instead of relying solely on expensive cruise missiles or manned aircraft for precision strikes, the Pentagon is now fielding loitering munitions, expendable drones designed to strike and destroy targets in a manner similar to the Iranian Shahed 136 drone. These drones, often referred to in press reports as LUCAS, low-cost uncrewed combat attack system, have been reverse-engineered from captured Iranian designs and optimized with U.S. communications and targeting systems. Unlike U.S. cruise missiles that cost millions each, or manned fighter strikes that require intensive logistics and pilot risk, these drones can loiter for hours, strike key infrastructure, and saturate defenses at a fraction of the cost. They can be launched from ground sites or from ships at sea, and they change the calculus of how strikes might be executed. This is not theoretical. The unit has been tested at sea from American warships and stands ready to deploy if political decision-makers order it. While unmanned systems accelerate strike capability, nothing says strategic intent like a supercarrier. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the newest and most advanced aircraft carrier ever built, has repositioned from its peacetime stationing toward the eastern Mediterranean and onward to the Persian Gulf region. At over 1,100 feet long and displacing around 100,000 tons, the Ford is not simply a ship. It is a floating air base with nuclear power, an ability to generate some 25% more sorties per day than older carriers, and room for more than 75 fixed-wing aircraft. Its presence not only adds firepower but offers decision and response time compression for U.S. commanders. From the deck of a nuclear carrier, aircraft can strike hundreds of miles inland within minutes. In strategic terms, the Ford represents both deterrence and leverage. Its movements are tracked not just by Iran, but by allies and adversaries alike. When such a force enters a region, it changes the calculations of every political leader involved. Beyond loitering drones and supercarriers, the U.S. has recently moved F-35 stealth fighters into proximity to conflict zones. These are not just aircraft. They are flying sensor fusion platforms designed to see first, strike precisely, and share battlefield data across forces. Their distributed aperture systems give pilots a near 360 degrees battlefield picture, a force multiplier in contested environments. They retain most of their weapons internally to preserve stealth, or can carry additional ordnance externally when stealth isn't required. The F-35's presence effectively gives U.S. forces the ability to penetrate dense air defenses and target critical infrastructure from safer distances, a capability that becomes vital if air defense networks, like those around Iran, are active. Accompanying stealth fighters are older, but still incredibly potent, fighters like the F-15 Strike Eagle. With a payload capacity of over 23,000 pounds of ordnance, advanced radar, and long-range strike capability, the F-15 complements stealth jets by acting as a deep strike platform, particularly suited for hardened or deeply buried infrastructure, targets that might not be easily neutralized by drones or missiles alone. Perhaps the most symbolic deployment has been the forward positioning of F-22 Raptors, the U.S. Air Force's premier air superiority fighter. The U.S. operates only around 180 of them in total, and they are rarely deployed in large numbers overseas. Their presence in the Middle East signals intent to control the skies before any prolonged air campaign could unfold. Their design emphasizes supersonic cruising without afterburners, extreme maneuverability, and radar stealth. While their ground attack capacity is more limited than the F-35, their role in suppressing potential aerial resistance cannot be overstated. To secure rear areas and maintain freedom of movement, U.S. planners have also reinforced forward operating bases like Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, a remote but strategically critical hub, with more aircraft and defensive resources. In particular, long-range multi-role fighters like F-16s have reportedly been positioned not for strike missions, but to protect critical base infrastructure against potential Iranian retaliatory strikes, including missiles, drones, or asymmetric threats. When a military force starts hardening its supply and logistics hubs, it is rarely random. It's anticipation. Beyond carriers and aircraft, the U.S. has quietly amassed one of its most significant naval presences in the region in recent memory. Destroyers equipped with Aegis missile defense systems, submarines capable of launching Tomahawk cruise missiles, and amphibious ships with rapid response troops form a layered multi-domain posture that blends offense and defense. Combined with cyber, space-based ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and coalition partner forces, this web creates a flexible set of options, not just brute force, but the capability to adapt rapidly and decisively should diplomatic efforts collapse or aggression arise. All of this has unfolded against the backdrop of failed nuclear negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. Recent talks collapsed without agreement on Iran's nuclear program, which many in Washington describe as an unacceptable escalation risk if left unchecked. The presence of U.S. carriers, stealth jets, drones, and air dominance fighters has at times been described by officials as deterrence. But deterrence hinges on rational adversaries having a choice. When assets are postured this aggressively, the same forces that signal resolve can also enable action. There is a moment in every crisis when positioning ends and consequences begin. For weeks, analysts described the growing U.S. military buildup in the Middle East as deterrence. Aircraft carriers repositioned, stealth fighters rotated, drone units activated, rear bases hardened, naval groups layered into strike webs. But deterrence only works if the message is received and absorbed. When it is ignored or challenged, posture can turn kinetic. And that's where this story shifts. When long-range assets are pre-positioned, the time between decision and action shrinks dramatically. The moment authorization is given, a carrier deck can generate sorties within hours. Loitering drones can be launched from forward platforms. Submarines can fire cruise missiles from hundreds of miles offshore without warning. That compression of time is the defining feature of modern high-intensity warfare. In a scenario involving Iran, the opening phase would not resemble older wars built around slow troop mobilizations. It would be immediate, precise, and multi-domain. The likely sequencing: cyber and electronic warfare disruption, stealth penetration by F-35 aircraft, air dominance establishment by F-22s, follow-up heavy strikes from F-15 platforms, saturation by loitering munitions, naval cruise missile reinforcement. The objective would not be occupation. It would be paralysis. Air defense radars blinded, command networks fractured, missile launch systems neutralized, strategic infrastructure disabled. This is not about territory. It's about tempo. The side that controls the first 48 hours controls the narrative of the war. The deployment of large numbers of F-22 Raptors is not symbolic. It's doctrinal. The F-22 was designed for one purpose: eliminate enemy aircraft before they even realize they're being tracked. In a conflict with Iran, airspace would be heavily contested. Iranian air defenses are layered: mobile systems, fixed radar sites, and missile batteries distributed across terrain that favors concealment. Before any sustained strike campaign, the skies must be cleared. That's the Raptors' job. Once air superiority is achieved, the operational space opens dramatically. Stealth aircraft can penetrate deeper. Strike aircraft can operate with reduced risk. Drones can loiter longer. Tankers and ISR assets can move forward. Air dominance isn't flashy, but without it, nothing else works. Aircraft carriers dominate headlines, but submarines change wars. A guided missile submarine positioned quietly beneath the surface carries dozens of Tomahawk cruise missiles. each capable of striking hardened targets with precision. Unlike aircraft, submarines don't require airspace access. They don't broadcast presence. They don't escalate visually. They apply silent pressure. Destroyers equipped with Aegis systems serve dual roles: missile defense and strike capability. In a retaliatory environment where Iran could launch ballistic missiles toward U.S. or allied assets, Aegis becomes a shield. Layered naval formations create flexibility. Strike, defend, absorb, respond. It's not just about overwhelming force. It's about sustained optionality. The activation of a U.S. loitering munition unit marks something bigger than a tactical addition. It reflects a recognition that modern conflict is about cost efficiency. A cruise missile may cost over $1 million. A loitering drone? A fraction of that. In a saturation environment, quantity matters. Drones can overwhelm radar systems, trigger defensive interceptors, exhaust missile stocks, strike high-value but lightly protected assets. And because they loiter, they can wait. That patience changes battlefield psychology. Air defenses must remain active constantly, which drains resources. Saturation isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about exhaustion. What rarely makes headlines is the intelligence backbone behind every strike package. Space-based ISR assets track missile movements. Signals intelligence maps radar frequencies. Cyber units probe communication nodes. By the time aircraft move, much of the battle has already begun in invisible domains. The integration of F-35 sensor fusion with naval radar systems and satellite feeds creates a shared battlefield picture. This is what modern doctrine calls multi-domain integration. Air, sea, cyber, and space operating simultaneously. If one layer fails, others compensate. That redundancy is deliberate. Military capability does not equal inevitability. The ultimate decision sits above generals and admirals. Political leaders weigh regional escalation risk, global oil market shock, impact on alliances, domestic public opinion, retaliation potential. Iran possesses asymmetric tools: ballistic missiles, proxy forces, regional militia networks, maritime disruption capabilities. A confrontation would not remain contained easily. Even limited strikes could cascade. But chess has one truth: positioning alone does not win the game. Timing does. The moment one side miscalculates tempo, advantage flips. Right now, the board is crowded. Pieces are active, but no checkmate has been declared. When a kamikaze drone unit becomes combat ready, the most advanced aircraft carrier moves within operational range. Stealth fighters deploy in significant numbers. Air superiority assets reinforce the theater. Rear bases are hardened. Naval formations layer defenses and offense. That is not coincidence. It is structured readiness. It does not guarantee war, but it guarantees capability. And in geopolitics, capability shapes decisions as much as intent. We are not watching chaos. We are watching calculated positioning. Whether this ends in deterrence, limited strikes, prolonged confrontation, or diplomatic reset depends on choices made far above the flight decks and command centers. But history teaches one thing clearly. When this many high-value assets move simultaneously, the margin for error shrinks. And when margins shrink in geopolitics, the world pays attention.